He wasn't even crying. He just looked at me and said it like he'd been waiting. Like it was something he'd rehearsed in his head over and over again, waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. And when it finally came out of his mouth, it was quiet. Almost too quiet. No hesitation. No stutter. Just truth. Like he was handing it to me in the most fragile way he knew how. And I swear to you, my body stopped moving. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. It felt like every sound in the room vanished. Even the thunder outside seemed to pause. Like the world itself was holding its breath with me. And I just stood there in that moment, trying to figure out if I'd actually heard him right. Because there are some words you never expect to hear from your own child. No matter how old they are. No matter how grown up they've become. There are some sentences that should never exist between a mother and her son. But there it was. And he meant it. And the part that scared me the most? Somewhere deep down, a part of me didn't want to unhear it. I wish I could tell you I dropped the glass in shock. That I screamed. That I ran from the room and slammed a door so hard it shook the walls. But I didn't. The glass trembled in my hand, sure. I was shaking like a leaf in a storm. But I held it. My fingers tightened around it like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. Like if I let go, I'd float away into something I couldn't come back from. I looked at him, my son, and all I could think was, when did he stop looking like a boy? When did his voice get that low? When did he start looking at me like he was seeing something I didn't even know was still alive in me? The house was quiet. Funeral flowers still sat in the corner, wilting in the heat, too tired to be beautiful anymore. The windows were streaked with rain. My husband's shoes were still by the door. His favorite jacket still hanging on the hook, like he might walk through that door any second and ask what we were having for dinner. And yet here I was standing in the middle of all that silence, looking into the eyes of the boy I raised, only he wasn't a boy anymore. And he wasn't asking me for comfort or advice or help. He was offering something I didn't have a name for. Not lust. Not love. Just a kind of knowing. Like he'd seen right through me. Past the black dress. Past the widow face I wore at the funeral. Past the polite nods and the casseroles and the "you'll be okay"s. Like he saw the hollow, aching woman behind the grief and didn't look away. And before I even knew what was happening, I realized I wasn't angry. I wasn't disgusted. I was terrified. Terrified of what it meant to be seen that clearly. Terrified of what it meant to feel something after all this time. Terrified that maybe, just maybe, part of me wanted to say yes. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I just stood there. My hand around a glass I didn't remember pouring. My skin hot and cold all at once. My heart beating like it had just remembered how. And him? He waited. No pressure. No pleading. Just waited. Like he knew I needed a moment to fall apart quietly. If this isn't your first time with Passionate Tales Unfold, welcome back. You already know some stories don't ask permission before they begin. They just arrive. And all you can do is hold your breath and let them carry you. Because this isn't just a story about grief. Or boundaries. Or the things we're not supposed to say out loud. It's a story about loneliness. About craving closeness in places you never thought you'd find it. And about the moments that change you before you even realize they have. So come with me. There's more I need to tell you. And none of it's simple. But all of it? It's real. The air hadn't changed. It still smelled like him. Like musk and warm tobacco. That deep, earthy kind of scent that clung to everything he owned: his coats, his favorite chair, the nape of his neck when he'd pull me in without a word. I don't know why, but that hurt more than the eulogy. Because people's words fade. Even the nice ones. Especially the nice ones. But a scent? A scent stays. It crawls under your skin, hides in your clothes, wakes you up in the middle of the night when you swear he just walked past the door. It haunts you differently. I was in our bedroom, if I could still call it that. The light was gray, the kind of gray that flattens everything. Not dramatic. Not stormy. Just dull. Like the sun had given up trying to reach in through the windows. There were boxes all around me. Half packed, half forgotten. One filled with ties. Another with cufflinks I didn't know he had. And one with little things I couldn't bring myself to throw away yet. His old wristwatch that didn't tick anymore. A keychain from our honeymoon. A photo of us at a wedding, arms around each other like we actually fit. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, knees pulled up like I was trying to make myself smaller. Like if I could shrink, maybe the grief wouldn't be so loud. The sheets were cold beneath me. I hadn't slept on his side since the day he died. I couldn't. It felt wrong. Like I'd be erasing something sacred. But tonight I was just tired. Tired of pretending I was okay. Tired of people telling me how strong I was. Tired of carrying a silence that never really left the room. The closet was still open. His shoes lined up like soldiers. His dress shirts still on the hangers. A bottle of cologne half used, the cap missing like it always was. I used to nag him about that. Funny how the things that once annoyed you become the things you'd give anything to have back. I leaned into the doorway, just a little, and breathed him in. God. That scent. That deep, male comfort. It wrapped around me like a whisper I wasn't supposed to hear anymore. I closed my eyes, and for half a second, I let myself pretend that he was in the bathroom, brushing his teeth. That any second, he'd walk out shirtless, laughing at something that didn't matter. That we'd lie down together like we used to, legs tangled, his hand finding mine under the sheets without even looking. I opened my eyes again, and he wasn't there. Of course, he wasn't. That kind of loneliness doesn't feel like a wound. It feels like a hollow. Like a quiet that echoes too loud. That sits beside you even when the room's full of people. It's sharp. It's constant. And it makes you do strange things. Things you'd never admit. Not even to yourself. Like replaying your last fight on a loop. Like wondering if he knew how much you hated the way he left so sudden, so final. No goodbye. No warning. Just a phone call and a collapse. Like sitting there in his closet, running your fingers across his jacket sleeves, pretending he might reach out and grab your hand from the other side. That kind of grief, it doesn't just break your heart. It breaks your sense of self. And that's where I was when I heard him. My son. His voice low. Gentle. Mom, he said from the doorway. Just my name, like he was testing it out. I didn't turn around. I just sat there, staring into that dark little closet like it might open up and take me with it. Do you need help with anything? He asked. His voice had changed lately. There was this softness to it. A depth. Not the bark of a boy, but the velvet of a man who knew how to wait for someone to answer. I shook my head. I'm fine. But I wasn't. He knew it. I knew it. And the air between us thickened slow and heavy. Like rain behind your ribs. He stepped into the room quietly. Didn't touch anything. Just stood near the foot of the bed, close enough to feel but far enough not to intrude. I could see him out of the corner of my eye. The way his hands were tucked into the sleeves of his sweatshirt, like he didn't know what to do with them. The way his eyes flickered to the closet, then back to me. He said nothing, and still everything felt louder. I realized, in that moment, that I hadn't really looked at him in weeks. Not as a mother. Not through that filtered lens of chores and bills and did you eat today? But just as someone standing in front of me. Whole. Present. Watching. He looked so much like his father when he tilted his head like that. But there was something else there too. Something I couldn't name. Not yet. But it was there. And it saw me. Not the grieving widow. Not the mother checking off to-do lists. Me. The woman. The alone woman. And that, somehow, scared me more than losing the man I'd buried last week. I cleared my throat. You don't have to stay. I'm just going through things. I know, he said. I just didn't want you to do it alone. His words were simple. Kind. But they slid under my skin like warmth after a long, cold day. And suddenly, I felt it again, that pulse of something I hadn't let myself feel in months. Not desire. Not yet. But attention. That soft, magnetic pull you get when someone's looking at you, not through you. And for the first time since the funeral, I felt awake. Still broken. still shattered in 1,000 places, but awake. He sat on the edge of the bed, not beside me, not close enough to touch, but close enough for me to feel the shift in the air. Like a question had just entered the room, one neither of us wanted to ask out loud. I kept my eyes forward, still locked on the open closet, like it might offer some kind of answer, some kind of permission to move somewhere, anywhere other than this grief-ridden shell of a bedroom. And then he spoke. "You should come stay with me for a while." That's all he said. Soft, calm, like he was offering a cup of tea instead of turning the whole axis of my world. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. The words just hung there between us, warm and steady and terrifying. My heart fluttered, one of those wild, startled flutters you try to bury before anyone can hear it. Stay with you? My grown boy, now a man in a home I've never slept in? My mind raced, even as my body stayed frozen. Because the thing is, grief has a rhythm. You wake. You ache. You fold laundry. You cook things you don't eat. You stare at chairs that aren't filled anymore. You cry, maybe. You don't, maybe. You forget how your laugh sounds. But you do things. You survive. You stay busy. So when someone offers escape, even wrapped in kindness, even from your own son, it feels dangerous. It feels like cheating on your pain. And yet, there was a part of me, quiet and buried, that whispered, what if you just said yes? Not because I needed help packing. Not because I needed to be mothered or managed or checked in on. But because I didn't want to wake up in this house anymore. Didn't want to hear the quiet creak of the hallway where his slippers used to shuffle. Didn't want to keep seeing the space on the couch where his hand would rest, always waiting for mine. I wanted space from my sorrow. And he, my son, was offering it. I finally turned to look at him. Really look. His face was older than I remembered. Not wrinkled, not weathered. Just settled. Like life had put weight on his shoulders, but he'd learned to carry it. His eyes didn't plead. They offered a safe place, a pause, a breath. There was nothing strange about the words he said. They were what any loving son might offer his grieving mother. But it was the way he said them, the stillness in him, that shook something loose inside me. There was no awkwardness, no discomfort, only presence. Only him, reaching across the silence, asking me to let go just a little. I looked down at my hands. They didn't look like mine anymore. Too pale, too dry, too tired. And yet, I felt them tremble. Not from fear, but from the possibility of not waking up to this house again tomorrow. I nodded just once. Not even sure I meant to. It felt like someone else had moved my head for me. Okay, I whispered. Just for a few days. That was the lie we both agreed to without saying it. Because we knew. A few days might not be enough. Might turn into something else entirely. He smiled. Not with teeth. Not loud. Just that gentle curve of someone who'd been holding his breath and could finally exhale. And when he stood, I saw it again, the man. Not my little boy chasing fireflies in the backyard. Not the teenager slamming doors and staying out too late. But this new version. Quiet. Grounded. Still carrying the weight of his own grief. And still offering me shelter beneath it. Pack light, he said. You won't need much. And then he walked out of the room. Just like that. No hug. No ceremony. Just the echo of his footsteps, soft against the floorboards, as he gave me space to decide what I'd carry with me. I sat there a moment longer. The closet still open. The boxes still waiting. But something had shifted. Not just in the room, but in me. A decision had been made. And I didn't know if it was right. I didn't even know if it was good. But it was forward. And right now, that was enough. It was late when I arrived. Not late in the way a clock says so, but the kind of late that settles behind your eyes, the kind that makes everything quieter than it really is. The rain had started just after I pulled my coat on, soft at first, then steady. It whispered against the windshield the whole drive, a kind of gentle percussion that filled the silence between us. He didn't say much on the way. Neither did I. But I noticed how his hands stayed at 10 and 2 on the wheel, how his jaw tensed every time we passed under a flickering streetlight. I noticed how he turned the heat toward me without asking, how he glanced over only once when I sighed and didn't finish it. His place was not what I expected. A sleek modern loft, all glass and dark wood. No curtains. Just wide panes of window and the rain running down them like they were crying in reverse. Everything about his place felt clean. Too clean. Like no one had ever yelled here. No one had spilled coffee, or danced in their socks, or fallen asleep on the couch with a book still open on their chest. Like no one had ever cried here. The door shut behind me with a soft click, and I stood there in the entryway for a long breath, holding the handle of my rolling suitcase, not sure where to be. The floor was hardwood smooth and pale, and the wheels of my bag squeaked when I dragged it a few feet forward. That tiny sound felt too loud, too sharp. Like I was intruding. The walls were bare, except for one large canvas blue and silver strokes, abstract. Cold. A few shelves. Sparse furniture. A low sofa in slate gray. A single mug in the sink. His life didn't look like it had room for grief. Or for me. He came in behind me, shaking water off his shoulders. "Here," he said quietly, taking my coat before I could shrug it off fully. His fingers brushed the back of my neck for half a second and I startled, just a little. Not from him, but from how long it had been since someone touched me gently. Not accidentally, not out of duty, but softly, like they noticed I was still here. He didn't ask why I flinched. He just hung the coat neatly on a rack and walked into the kitchen, which wasn't really a kitchen, more like a set of dark cabinets and quiet appliances. Everything stainless steel. No color. No clutter. I trailed behind him, still holding onto my suitcase like a lifeline. I walked past a closed door on the left. I didn't ask about it. Something in me didn't want to know. Some doors are easier kept shut, especially when you're in someone else's world. "Sit," he said gently, motioning toward a bar stool tucked beneath the island. I perched on the edge like I didn't want to disturb anything, like my grief might spill out and stain the floor. He moved with quiet confidence, opening a drawer, pulling out a kettle, moving as if he'd done this 1,000 times. Not rushed, not nervous, just calm, almost ritualistic. And when he placed the tea in front of me, our fingers touched again. His were warm, steady. Mine were cold from the rain, or maybe just from everything. I flinched again, but softer this time. And he noticed. Still, he didn't pull away too fast. He let the contact linger half a second longer than necessary, enough to say I'm here, but not enough to press. The tea steamed between us. I wrapped my hands around the cup like it might warm more than just my fingers. We didn't speak. He sat across from me, elbows resting on the counter, eyes fixed not on my face, but on something near it. A point just beyond me. That kind of gaze that meant he wanted to ask something but didn't know how. I didn't give him the opening, because I didn't want to talk. I wanted to feel safe in the quiet. And somehow I did. There was a soft hum from the refrigerator. The tap-tap of rain on the windows. Somewhere, the faint groan of plumbing settling. And us. Two people who knew each other so intimately in one way and suddenly, not at all in another. Because this wasn't mother and son in the family room anymore. This was a woman carrying grief, and a man who'd lost something, too, and we were trying to exist in the same space without breaking it. I sipped my tea. It burned a little, but I didn't mind. Pain that small felt like something I could control. I glanced around the room again. No photos. No clutter. No footprints on the rug. Just stillness. That same clean stillness I had craved a few hours ago now felt almost too quiet. I cleared my throat, more out of habit than need. "I'll just take the guest room," I said, not even asking where it was. He nodded, rising slowly. "Come. I'll show you." His hand hovered near the small of my back as I stood. He didn't touch me, but I felt the heat of his palm like it had, and the sound of my suitcase wheels squeaking again as I followed him down the hallway. That sound suddenly felt familiar. Like maybe this wasn't a mistake. Like maybe the silence in this house would be easier to carry than the one I left behind. The days passed slowly in my son's house. Time didn't rush the way it used to. Mornings were quiet. Evenings quieter. I tried to keep busy folding things that didn't need folding, wiping down countertops already clean, rearranging books I never intended to read. It helped sometimes. Sometimes it didn't. And then he started appearing. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but like smoke easing into a room. You don't notice it until you're breathing it in. The first time, he was at the kitchen island. Not sitting, just standing, looking out the window like the rain had something new to say. I hadn't heard him come in. I don't even remember the door opening. I'd come in from the guest room to make tea, barefoot, still wearing the cardigan I slept in, and there he was already part of the space, like he'd always been there. He didn't look at me right away. Didn't say a word. Just nodded once. Barely. I returned the gesture, confused but not threatened. Not even uncomfortable. More like I'd walked into a page already being read. My son walked in a moment later, casual as anything, tossing his keys on the counter. "Oh," he said, without ceremony, "you've met." But we hadn't. No introductions. No name offered. Not even a label like friend or neighbor. Just him. A man older than my son, but not by much. Composed. Quiet. The kind of quiet that says more than noise ever could. And his eyes, God. They didn't glance. They observed. I found him in the apartment a few more times that week. Never announced. Always already present when I arrived in a room. Sometimes he'd be sitting on the edge of the sofa, flipping slowly through a book with no real interest in the pages. Other times he'd be standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing out a glass that didn't seem to belong to anyone. Always calm. Always silent. He never spoke first. But he never missed anything. I caught him watching me once, not with lust. With curiosity. As though he wanted to know how I survived my own body. How I carried all that ache and still stood up every day. As though he was learning the language of me without needing translation. And I'll admit, that attention unnerved me. Not because it was inappropriate, but because it was complete. He saw me. Not as a mother. Not as a widow. Not even as a woman, really. Just as a presence. A being. Breathing. Walking. Holding too much in her chest. It had been a long time since I'd been looked at like that. Not through. At. One morning, my son stood in the entryway, suitcase in hand. "Just for 2 nights," he said, casual. "Clients in Chicago. Back before the weekend." I nodded, pretending not to be anxious. He kissed the top of my head before he left, something he hadn't done since he was 10. I watched his car disappear down the street, and I stayed by the window a little too long. When I turned around, the man was in the kitchen again. Same place. Same quiet. Pouring 2 cups of coffee this time. No questions. No performance. He slid 1 cup across the counter to me, fingers still wrapped around his own. I didn't thank him. Didn't have to. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It had grown roots. It held things. I sat down at the counter, slowly, and we drank together. Not looking at each other. Not talking. Just breathing the same still air. There was something sacred in it. Like we were 2 people protecting a space that couldn't be named. Later that afternoon, I passed by him in the hallway. Our shoulders didn't touch. But they could have. And I wondered what that would feel like, just that small friction of another body brushing past mine. Would I flinch again? Would he? He didn't turn to look at me. But I felt his awareness trail behind me like a thread I hadn't meant to pull. That night, I cooked dinner. Not much. Just soup and bread and something warm enough to fill the echo in the house. He appeared again, not hovering, not offering to help, just there. At the edge of the room. Present. He watched my hands as I chopped vegetables. Not intrusively. More like he was learning something about me just by the way I held the knife. And when we sat to eat, there was no music. No TV. Just the soft scrape of spoons against bowls and the occasional clink of a glass meeting wood. But beneath that quiet, something else stirred. Not lust. Not tension in the traditional sense. But awareness. of how close we were, of how little separated us, of how neither of us had chosen this moment, but both of us were inside it now. He didn't ask about my husband, didn't ask about my son, didn't ask anything really. But his eyes, those impossibly still eyes, they asked every question my heart wasn't ready to answer. And I could feel the silence growing thicker with every passing second. Not heavy, but charged. Like the moment before a storm, or the breath before a kiss. I went to bed early that night. Not because I was tired, but because I didn't know what I would do if I stayed. He remained in the living room, a book in his lap again. Barely touched. I walked past him slowly, letting the soft pad of my feet on the wood floor be the only sound. I felt his eyes follow me, and for the first time I didn't mind. The storm had been murmuring all evening, a low, distant grumble behind the rain, like something too tired to roar, but too restless to sleep. I remember thinking it was oddly fitting, that the sky felt the same way I did. It happened just after 10. The lights blinked once, then again, and went out with a soft sigh. Everything went still. Even the rain seemed to pause. I stood in the hallway for a moment, hand still on the light switch, like I was waiting to see if it would change its mind. But the darkness didn't flinch. Only the sound of wind, tapping softly against the glass, and the faint creak of the loft settling into night. Then, a flicker. Warm. Orange. Moving like breath. Candles. I followed the glow to the living room. He was there already. Of course he was. Sitting low on the couch, one elbow resting on the arm, eyes steady in the shadows. He didn't look startled or annoyed. Just present. He had a blanket in his lap, one I hadn't seen before. Thicker than the throws draped over the chairs. Almost like he'd brought it with him. He lifted it slowly as I approached, a silent offer. I didn't reach for it. Not right away. He draped it across the back of the couch beside him instead, leaving enough space for me to choose. "You can still go to bed," he said softly, his voice like gravel wrapped in velvet. "I'll be here when the lights come back." Just that. No coaxing, no pressure. A statement dressed as reassurance. But I didn't move. I stayed. I don't know if I was choosing company or avoiding loneliness. Sometimes they feel the same. I sat down beside him slowly, cautiously leaving polite inches between us. The blanket shifted, falling partly over my lap. I let it. The candlelight flickered across the walls, casting shadows that moved like ghosts with nowhere else to go. I didn't speak. Neither did he. But I could feel the tension between us changing shape, not tightening, not releasing, just becoming something else. Like the silence itself was listening. I stared at the flame on the table for a long while, my hands folded awkwardly in my lap. I don't know why I said it. Maybe the dark made it easier. Maybe the quiet made it necessary. But I turned my head toward him, barely, and I whispered, "I don't know how to be touched without apologizing for it." The words surprised even me. They sounded too small for the size of the ache behind them. Too simple for the years they carried. But they were true. Every inch of me knew that truth. From the way I'd flinched when my son hugged me at the airport, to how I still slept curled away from the side of the bed that no longer held a body. Touch had become something foreign. Loaded. Tender in all the wrong ways. He didn't answer. Didn't offer comfort or wisdom or pity. He just stayed still. Let the moment exist. And something about that felt like permission. He shifted, almost imperceptibly. His hand moved not toward mine, but near it, resting gently beside mine on the couch cushion, close enough to feel the warmth between our skin. But not touching. Not yet. His fingers didn't reach. They waited. Still. Open. Present. And that stillness. It unraveled something in me I didn't know was knotted. I could have moved away. Could have tucked my hands under the blanket and disappeared back into myself. But I didn't. I stayed. I let my fingers stay close. So close the heat between us felt louder than the thunder. The flicker of candlelight made everything feel softer. Less sharp. I looked down at our hands, his resting, mine trembling just slightly, and I thought about all the times I'd taught myself to shrink, to fold into smaller versions of need, to be gentle enough not to inconvenience anyone. And here was this hand, not demanding, not reaching, just waiting. There's a kind of intimacy that happens in silence. When two people agree, without saying a word, that something is allowed to exist between them. Not claimed, not defined, just allowed. And in that space, something shifted. Not between our hands, between our hearts. I wasn't being pulled toward him. I was settling into myself, next to him. And he didn't interrupt it. Didn't try to speed it up. Didn't try to fix me. He just sat there, steady, as though his stillness was a kind of shelter. My hand moved, just slightly. Not to hold. Not to reach. Just enough so that the backs of our fingers brushed. Once. Barely. But it felt like the loudest thing in the room. Like a bell rung underwater. His fingers didn't curl. Didn't react. They just stayed, warm and grounded. Letting mine find their place. I didn't know what came next. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, under candlelight and storm shadow, something inside me stopped bracing. Stopped apologizing. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't feel alone. It was a Thursday. The kind of Thursday that slips past unnoticed, gray, soft, uneventful. But something in the air had changed. Not loud. Not dramatic. More like the way a room feels different after you've cried in it. Not because it looks different, but because you do. We were in the kitchen. The storm had passed 2 nights ago, but its echoes still lingered in the way I moved cautiously, quietly, as if anything too sudden might break something fragile I hadn't named yet. He stood by the counter, opening a bottle of wine. The click of the cork was sharp. Final. Familiar. He didn't ask if I wanted a glass. He just poured 2. Placed one in front of me. And for once, I didn't question the kindness of it. We sat at the bar, side by side, both facing forward. The loft was quiet. The hum of the fridge filled the silence like a low lullaby. I sipped slowly. He did too. No conversation. No questions. Just that quiet understanding that sometimes, when words feel like pressure, silence feels like grace. Then I laughed. I don't even remember what made it happen. Maybe a small story. A joke he tossed in the air like a stone skipping across water. But I laughed. A real one. The kind that starts in your throat, but ends in your chest. That shakes your ribs loose and leaves your eyes wide with surprise. And then I covered my mouth, embarrassed. It had been so long since something inside me had lifted instead of fallen. I turned to him, still chuckling under my breath. And he was already looking at me, not smiling, just watching, as if trying to memorize the exact shape of my joy. Not to own it, not to chase it, just to honor it. He didn't speak, didn't tell me I was beautiful, didn't reach for my hand. He just let the moment be as sacred as it felt. And that quiet reverence did something to me. I found myself leaning in. Not consciously. Not as a decision. More like my body was remembering something my mind hadn't allowed. The way people lean toward heat. Toward safety. Toward something that doesn't demand, but welcomes. My knee brushed his. Softly. Once. It would have been easy to move away. To chalk it up to space, to coincidence, to nothing. But I didn't. And neither did he. He turned slightly, facing me now. His glass rested on the counter between us. One hand curled gently around the stem. His gaze didn't waver. And still he didn't touch me. Didn't close the distance. Just sat there, steady as always, as though his stillness was the invitation. My throat was dry. Not from the wine. From the weight of the moment. From the pull I could feel, low and slow, like the tide easing toward the shore. I set my glass down. And before I could stop myself, I said it. Soft, honest, bare. If I start something, my eyes met his. I don't know that I'll stop. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a confession. It was a surrender. Not to him. To myself. To everything I'd kept boxed up and folded small since the funeral. Since the years before it, even. Desire. Grief. Hunger. Tenderness. Not for sex. For presence. For being seen. He held my gaze. Didn't blink. Didn't flinch. And then he said, just as softly, "Then don't start. Unless you want it." His voice didn't rise. It didn't carry heat or hesitation. Just truth. Boundaries made of silk instead of steel. We didn't kiss. We didn't even move. But the air between us? It vibrated. Like two strings tuned to the same quiet ache. Like something waiting to be chosen. And maybe that was the most intimate part of all. That in the middle of this cold, modern loft, with our knees barely touching and our wine glasses half full, I felt something awaken in me. Not just desire. Not just need. But a choice. To want. To allow. To not apologize for either. I didn't move after that. Not forward. Not back. Just stayed still. Breathing in that space between his words and my silence. It's strange how stillness can feel more powerful than any touch. Like the world pauses, waiting to see what you'll choose. What you'll let yourself feel. And I didn't run. He stood up first. Not fast. Just quiet. He didn't ask me to come with him. Didn't reach for my hand. He just walked slowly toward the couch and sat down, leaned back into it like he had nowhere else to be. And when he glanced over his shoulder, it was enough. I followed, not because I knew what I was doing, but because I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts anymore. The couch was wide, firm, covered in soft charcoal fabric that still held warmth from the afternoon sun, now gone. He sat on one side. I sat on the other. But somehow, our bodies found a language we hadn't spoken before. His arm opened slightly, like a page inviting me in. And I leaned into it. Carefully, almost guiltily, like I was breaking some rule I hadn't agreed to follow. But when my cheek settled against his chest, I exhaled. All the way. His body was warm beneath me. Not too warm. Just enough. Like a place I could rest without explaining why I needed to. His hand rested on the small of my back. No movement. Just there. A weight. A grounding. I hadn't been touched like that in years. And it wasn't the hand. It was the intention. He wasn't pulling me closer. He wasn't searching for more. He was just there. With me. The tears came without warning. No sobs. No gasps. Just a slow, steady leaking from the corners of my eyes down to my chin. I tried to hide it at first. Tilted my head away, buried deeper into the fabric of his shirt. But he felt it. I know he did. Because a moment later, his hand lifted. And then, gently, slowly his fingers ran through my hair. Not in a way that sought permission, but in a way that offered it. Again and again. One slow stroke at a time. I wasn't crying from pain. That's what surprised me. I wasn't even crying from sadness. It was softness. The kind that breaks you open from the inside. Because when you've been holding yourself together for so long, gentleness is the only thing strong enough to undo you. I thought I wanted to be touched. I whispered into the quiet. He didn't answer. Didn't need to. I just wanted to be safe. And then the words found their way through my throat like they'd been waiting years to escape. This is the first time in years I felt held. Not handled. He exhaled. Not a sigh. Just a breath. Deep and full. Like my words had entered him too. I think that's when I knew this wasn't about desire. Not yet. Maybe not ever. This was about witnessing. About someone seeing the version of me that didn't have to be strong. Or polite. Or composed. Just tired. And alive. We didn't talk after that. His fingers stayed in my hair. His breath was slow and steady, chest rising under my cheek. I don't know how long we stayed like that. But at some point, the storm outside gave way to silence. And when I looked up, the clock said past midnight. He looked down at me. And in his eyes there was no question. No assumption. just awareness. I think that's the rarest kind of intimacy. When someone knows not to press, not to chase, just to let you exist in their presence and believe you are enough, exactly as you are. He stood again, this time with even more care. I sat up slowly, unsure what happened next. He reached out his hand not to take me anywhere, but to help me up. I let him. The hallway was dim as we walked, side by side. He paused by the guest room, opened the door. The light flickered on, but I didn't step in. My feet didn't move. I just looked at the bed. Crisp sheets, perfectly folded blanket, and I felt my throat tighten. I didn't want to be alone, not because I needed him, but because for the first time in so long I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's home. I looked up at him. Just once. No words. And he nodded. No hesitation. Just quiet understanding. He led me into his room. I half expected it to be colder, more closed off. But it wasn't. It was warm. Lived in. A stack of books by the bed. A shirt draped over a chair. A small record player in the corner. And the bed not too big. Not too small. He pulled back the blanket gently. I climbed in on one side. He moved to the other. We didn't face each other. We didn't touch. We didn't speak. But somewhere in the middle of the night, my hand reached for his under the blanket. Not for passion. Not for more. Just for confirmation that he was real. That he was still there. And he let me. Fingers laced loosely. No pressure. No demand. Just a quiet hum of safety in the dark. I didn't dream that night. But I didn't need to. Because when I opened my eyes to the morning light, I wasn't hollow anymore. I was full of something I hadn't felt in years. Not love. Not lust. But peace. When he came back, I didn't ask where he'd been. It wasn't the first time he'd disappeared for days on end, and I didn't expect an explanation now. The way he looked at me was enough. No words, just an understanding between us that we never had to speak out loud. He stood at the doorway, suitcase in hand, eyes soft. They didn't scan me for anything specific. Just a knowing. And in that moment, I didn't feel the need to explain. There was no need to confess, to say anything about what had happened while he was gone. The man in the other room. The night spent in silence and warmth. None of it mattered. Not really. Because it was me who had changed. I met his gaze, but it wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't guilt. It was the way you look at someone and realize they've been in the exact same place you have, but they don't need to share that story to feel the distance between you. We were both older now. We both understood that some things don't need to be confessed to be seen. I didn't speak. He didn't need me to. Instead, I took a long breath, looking past him to the hallway mirror. The glass didn't lie. The reflection staring back at me wasn't the same woman who had walked into this house. Not quite. There was color in my cheeks again. There was something alive in my eyes that hadn't been there in years. The edges of my face softened, as if the grief I'd been carrying for so long had made space for something else. Something quieter. Warmer. I didn't feel empty anymore. I glanced back at him. His eyes were still on me, but I didn't feel exposed. I didn't feel like I was standing in the middle of some terrible choice. I felt seen. I took a slow step toward him, closer than I ever had before. The air between us still thick with the unsaid, but for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't weigh on me. It felt like it was holding us both up, the absence of words somehow creating the connection we hadn't known we needed. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked. The question wasn't unusual. He asked it all the time. But this time, I didn't just nod. This time, I let myself speak the truth. "I'm okay," I whispered. I wasn't sure what being okay meant, but in that moment, it felt like enough. It felt like more than enough. Later that evening, when he was settled back into his own routine, I found myself back in the living room. The house was quieter than I expected, but the stillness felt different now. There was a softness in the corners of the rooms. A gentleness I hadn't noticed before. I ran my fingers over the back of the couch, tracing the fabric like I was learning it for the first time. And then I heard his voice. Not from the other room. Not from the kitchen. It came from the hallway, just outside. His voice, low, careful. "Clara." I froze. It was his voice, unmistakable. But it wasn't an invitation. It wasn't a demand. It was a whisper. A name. Almost like a prayer. I didn't respond immediately. Because, in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't waiting for permission. I wasn't waiting for someone to tell me it was okay to feel anything. I had let go of that need. The last time someone had said my name like that, spoken it with such softness, was before everything got complicated. Before love turned to grief. Before loneliness became my only companion. But now? Now my name was spoken like a memory one I hadn't realized I'd lost. A memory of being seen. Of being held. When I finally spoke again, I didn't say his name. I didn't ask what it meant. I didn't even ask him to explain. I just said, "I'm here." And that was enough. It felt like the beginning of something new, but not because of the man or the storm. It was something that began with me. My grief didn't disappear. It wasn't erased. It didn't leave me as quickly as I'd hoped. But it made room. Room for softness. Room for presence. Room for someone who saw me not as a widow. Not as a mother. Not as someone defined by loss, but as Clara. And in that space, I found warmth. I found peace in the absence of needing to explain. Peace in knowing that sometimes, being seen is all you need to begin again. His name lingered in the air. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel ashamed of the empty spaces in my heart. Instead, I welcomed them. Clara. His voice, again, soft and familiar, wrapped around my name like the safest place I could be. I smiled, quietly to myself. And, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. What would you have done if the quiet was louder than your loneliness? If, after all the years of empty rooms and unsaid things, you suddenly found that silence wasn't your enemy anymore? What if it was the space that held you, wrapped you in a kind of peace you didn't even know you were longing for? I don't have the answers. But I wonder if maybe Clara found them. In the smallest moments. In the softest touches. In the stillness she let herself finally sink into. The rain sounds grow softer, like it's finally letting go of the weight it's been carrying. A deep breath in the silence. So, I ask you, what part of Clara's story stayed with you? Was it the moment she finally laughed? A deep, real laugh that broke through all that grief and tension, maybe a laughter that surprised even her. Or maybe it was the night the lights went out. The moment when the quiet became too much to ignore, but somehow, in that silence, she found something she hadn't known she was missing. Something deeper than she expected. Take a moment. Let those moments settle. Let them find their way to you. This is Passionate Tales Unfold. And sometimes, healing begins when you stop trying to explain it. When you let the stillness speak for you.